One back. Oh, Jason, what am I saying, Dan?
Dan Hughes is excused, and so is Forrest Krister, in both excused absences for today's meeting. I have Jason Green from the town and John Karen as our attorney. All right, we're going to start with please rise for the invocation, which Mr. Scott Stafford's going to do for us.
Bow our heads, please. Lord, we are meeting today to conduct matters of business. Guide our hearts and our minds in the spirit of fairness, right thought, and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon our activities so that our affairs may reach a successful conclusion. Thank you for being our sound of guidance today.
Now pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which I'll start with the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, December 1st, 2020. Any changes, edits? Karen, do you have any?
Oh, I would think.
Scott? Jane? I have one question that was on page 5, right above the administrative agenda, where it says that Town Attorney Attorney Herron stated it was in bad form, but then goes on to say there was already a form for the people to fill out to track the 3 per year limitation. I didn't think there was a form. That was what most of our discussion was about. That there isn't a form for these garage sales, registered garage sales.
Oh, there's a check, there's a listing for it in a box on one.
Okay.
If we're talking about the garages, yes.
Yeah, I didn't think that there was a form, but it's not a specific form for garage sales. It's just.
No, it lumps other temporary uses together that have been on one form, and you check which one and.
Okay, then that's, I'm good with it then. Do I hear a motion?
Approve?
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Minutes are approved from December 1st, 2020. We're going to open up our public hearing for Chapter 6 Land Development Code Amendments. Down in, there's both sides of this one.
Don't have anything, right, intro? I can just proceed, it's legislative, right, so I can, okay. The town has before you a proposed amendment to Chapter 6, Maintenance Codes, Building Codes, and Coastal Regulations of the Land Development Code. This chapter will actually be edited multiple times because there's actually so much kind of thrown into it. For example, towards the end of the chapter, which we didn't include in your packet, is primarily the local flood ordinance gets adopted into this Chapter 6. It also has a lot of building regulations and permitting type things. It'll be revised multiple times. We didn't want to tackle the flood part of it yet because we want to wait till we got closer to the flood maps, the new flood maps being ready for adoption. We'll be working on some of that language in those regulations close to that. This is trying to tackle really an immediate need right now. There's a couple things in here that have been outdated for quite some time. For example, it calls out the wind codes being 130 miles an hour, and we're at 100. We still follow by the Florida building codes. It just didn't make sense to have outdated and wrong information in here. So that's some of the things that we were trying to tackle with this. There's a couple other changes, and also most of the strikeout and underline you will see is on the licensing side of it. We decided basically instead of listing all the different licenses that are already under the Florida statutes and corrected by the Florida Building Code, or I'm sorry, the statutes and related to the building code, those and basically said you got. Also is in there is then we updated the local regulations for licensing. So Lee County has a process where they've accepted certain licensing professions, and so we recognize that and always have, and so that list is edited to what's consistent with what Lee County did. Other than that, most of the changes, there's a couple strikes. I do want to point out on, let me find the page, I missed an underline. It again? Okay, on, nope, that's not it. The section that strikes out the Lee County, got two different documents. Section 6-45 is page 18 in your packet, I think. So we struck the Lee County Administrative Code for fees. Obviously, we don't go by that code, and the town of Fort Myers Beach fee schedule should be underlined. Point that out for the record.
Would be the first paragraph there.
Right, the first paragraph at the top of page 18, 6-45. Previously, we got to remember, a lot of this section is outdated again, partly because it was adopted when we were incorporated. It's been somewhat updated, but not really, so that's where we're trying to clean this up. It's maybe the biggest change, and there is, and then I'll discuss that, which has to do with garage doors and other doors, is on section,
23.
what was it? I'm sorry.
23.
So that is, section, it's R322 is kind of the building code reference, and number 4, striking the number 4. This goes back a few years to discussion about garage doors. This section of code is one thing, it's also been interpreted a different way, but it limits the amount of garage doors in a structure. So essentially it says a 2-car garage door. Arrived 3.5 years ago, their staff had been including single garage doors, so you could do 2 independent garage doors separately. One of the first things I was told when I got here is that the town wanted to change that. Presented that, and I think what happened at council, and they ended up rejecting it. What happened at council is there was confusion from some people about changing flood regulations and what that really meant with it. Since then, we've evaluate that and update that, and that's been have that 3rd garage door if you want a side. This basically, we couldn't figure out a reason, have research, couldn't figure out that limitation was there. Some of the things, restrictions for enclosures below flood are intended to limit the uses of that enclosure after the enclosure occurs. So we don't want people converting that space to habitable space, right? Functional space is supposed to be parking, storage, and access. But newer garage doors seems to actually encourage that. You're not going to convert it to a rec space if you got 3 garage doors. It just seems counterintuitive what the intent was. So without, over 3 years of us reaching out, being able to figure out what the purpose of that was, other than maybe an aesthetics component, it doesn't belong in this building code change or section. So what we've decided is we're going to recommend removing that, and then when we rewrite the land development codes, we can have a separate conversation about zoning and aesthetic under a building code. Other communities I've worked in, they've done encouraging for side loading garages, or not having the snout house type thing you have in an A zone, where you have it's full garage out in front of the house and you can't even see the house anymore. You can do codes related to design and aesthetics, but that belongs in the zoning regulation. The other part that we have not edited, but has been a topic of discussion, is number 3 above that, which limits the types of doors. That's done any development or talked to developers in the town has probably heard, why do we do this? And in fact, it's actually some would say it's restrictive, some say it's too lenient. If you want to have a discussion about doors below flood, that's something that we're trying to figure out if we need to edit that or not. We don't know what the temperature is. We don't have any magic bullet to solve it. But it's right now what it does is it limits it to a standard 36-inch door. You can do a double door if it's solid, essentially. A lot of lower levels overlooking the water, you'll end up seeing like a glass door. They can't do the double glass door. What a lot of builders are doing is they're doing either a block or a glass fixed window next to a single door. That's around to be able to do the double glass door.
This doesn't stop anybody from having a rec room downstairs or creating another apartment downstairs.
No, I think taking another step would perhaps do that and limiting or restricting those doors even further. But I don't, it's been a lot of pushback on what there is. To you for a discussion, you here in the community, and there we can make the edits here and then present them to the council. But it's really all we hear from on that section, that part of the code is really from the bill. Only them that you're hearing. I don't think most people in the community know or care about it until it's their house. Right now, if you do a double door with a French door or something like that, it's got to be a solid. Single, you can do the glass. Unique ways around being a double.
It hasn't limited people, it just made them become more creative.
Sure, that's one way to do it. And we've tried to be diligent and so that it's actually legitimately carried out. We've had builders ask, well, can I do the door, but fix the jam so that you can't open the door right now? And ultimately that just after the fact, and then the double doors. So, we spent a lot of time on this, and so figure out if it's fruitful time or not. But you're right, there's become ideas and ways around it to have that look, but glass opening, that probably encourages more use. Iron lighting's important. That's what I have, and I think that's the highlights of what's in here. This, and again, some of this, not a lot necessarily this part, but there's a whole second part to this chapter that'll come back before you. And again, as the building code stuff gets updated over time, we'll update those other sections. But for the most part, a lot of this chapter is taking building code sections and referencing to them and maybe making small local changes.
Any questions for him?
I've got a question. I'm glad you explained about how you crossed everybody out, because I thought, wow, it's Wild Wild West now.
No, it's partly anytime we can avoid restating something, especially a state law that then could get changed on another cycle, that makes sense to just pull it all out.
I do have one question, on page 29, section 6235D, the owner builder exemption.
Go for it.
Can you, so why are you now saying you cannot be a corporation, partnership, or trust? Because there are so many properties on this island that are in trust accounts or LLC. So,
This is a state law change?
No, state law has been this way for years. It's clarification. If you must be an individual in order to be able to pull an owner builder permit.
what happens if the house is under a trust? You can't
You
pull
can't.
it and do it.
No.
There's actually even a provision about, I think it's within the first year, if you sell or do, or change it out of the individual ownership, there's some issues.
And
Interesting.
the trust, can the trust delegate authority to anybody part of it? No?
The Florida Building Commission, the entity in Tallahassee that's responsible, and the Attorney General have opined that owner means an individual, not a corporation, not a trust, not a partnership.
I mean, that came across my desk too. Somebody
I
told
can
me
tell
about
you that you know, I've worked for more than a dozen municipalities over the last 30 years, and this question comes up every jurisdiction. I mean, you know, people say, well, why can't, and you know, my response, frankly, is local government in Tallahassee. They're the ones, and all of us here, it's the contractors protecting themselves. Saying, you know,
A contractor's lobby. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, that was my main.
Are we just skipping to, we're not going through this thing, or we're just
If
picking
you
up?
got go through your questions
You-
and what you have on it. I
Want to
mean,
go page by page? If that's, I mean.
A little bit.
okay.
I think there,
I had a general question. So my understanding is you're taking updates to the building code and everything, and putting that in here. A lot of it is copy and paste.
Well, it's,
Somehow
remember, it's
some
the underlying
sections
stuff.
say, this section is being amended as follows. And we're carrying, it looks like we're carrying that forward, and it's been, I looked in Municode, that's the way it is currently. Can we eliminate that over time and just copy and paste that section instead of saying, this section is being amended as follows?
Well, generally, what we do is when we we give you we give the LPA the what I would call the raw draft. We then format it in an ordinance format where it then has that provision at the beginning of, you know, section 1, whereas clauses are you're hereby ratified. Section 2. Town of Fort Myers Beach Land Development Code is hereby amended to read as follows, and that's why we do strike out and underline.
If you look in Municode today, the language actually says, you go to section, and it says amended as follows.
But no, remember, because that's a local amendment. So it's taking the document, and so, and I failed to point out, so I'm glad you asked that question, there's updating the date of the International Property Maintenance Code. And then there's, these are, what follows after that as amended are amendments to that document that are local amendments.
So
That's
when
why
it-
you have that
Yeah, so
terminology.
when it gets codified, unless it's a purely local ordinance that's not being codified, and sometimes you'll see that you know, at the, if you go to Muni Code, you go to the first page, you'll say, you know, have a drop-down box on the left that says the following ordinance has been adopted but have not yet been codified. And you'll see some of that, but when it gets put into the book itself that's online, all the strikeouts are dropped and the underlines are dropped, and it's just what is it that's been adopted.
So I
It's
understand,
clean.
I understand that. So in our packet, okay, and that's where, what I find a little confusing is, let's go to page 9. Okay. So, under 6.2, okay, if you just start at the top, we strike out 2009 to 218. That's a change we've made, okay?
We're adopting, with
Then,
this
the maintenance
adoption,
code is hereby amended as follows, boom, 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 boom. And this is throughout our packet. And that, we don't change that. We don't say we've approved that amendment, and now we don't get rid of that language.
it's just a format they did because to clarify that it's another document, whereas we do the land development code, zoning stuff, that's our document, right? So we can make the breakout and underline. And it's the setup that way for the building code stuff too, that if we're if we have local changes slightly to the reference, so you take a reference out of the building code and they modify the language. So that language is staying if it's not stricken, but it's a local amendment to another document. We adopt the Florida Building Code in its entirety, except with the amendments as follows.
Yeah, so, my understanding is the Florida Building Code, they make changes here. They publish it and they say, we're hereby amending the section, okay? Following year, they don't carry that forward every time, that becomes a code.
My
So
thoughts
at
are,
one point, it's kind of like, and then we carry it forward, and it's like, can we clean this up?
I think it's because we don't do that with our own amendments to our own document, but because they're amendments to another document that we've adopted and by reference. Try to be more clear. It's not it is our language, but not amending their document, right? Or in our document, grabbing language.
The last time we amended was 2009. If you look at version 2010, they don't have that. That's not verbatim what it says in the building code. So it's just a question of trying to clean things up and make it a little more intuitive for the average person.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. As Jason points out, those sections and the reasons why they generally stay there is because they are local amendments to a larger document that we don't control. So, for example, the specific sections you're referring to, we've adopted by reference the International Maintenance Code that is promulgated by, not by us. We don't write it. We just, you know, it's made available for adoption. And it has at the beginning of that code, it says this code may be modified by local, you know, at the local level. And so we want to make sure that, you know, for example, they may call this body, that code, the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. And we strike out and we say, no, we'll refer to it as the local planning agency. So if you, but if, you know, if you don't see that there, and since it's the entire code's not set there, if you go and you find the actual International Maintenance Code, you're going to see Board of Appeals, because that's how they have it listed. So I hope I'm making sense that that's a local amendment that always stays there, as long as the body that is potentially looking at the document or interpreting it would be the Town of Fort Myers Beach Local Planning Agency. So we would say the section, you know, 3.0.1 of the International Maintenance Code is hereby amended to read as follows. And it would say, You know, the entity responsible for administering this code or interpreting it is the Town of Fort Myers Beach Local Planning Agency. That would be our local amendment, and we would keep that in the code so everyone knows that it's the local planning agency that is the entity that is interpreting and responsible for interpreting the code.
Well,
I hope
I'll
that
look
makes
at-
sense.
We'll look at format.
You know what I mean.
I do. I was trying not to rearrange format at this point because of the emergency nature of the
And again,
160 with the new building code coming into.
it doesn't have to be something that needs to be done immediately, but over time, if we can clean it up, I think something's been in the code all those years. Again, keeping the language hereby amended. My impression is, well, they probably, the way it is right now is we keep that language from year to year from 2008 point.
Maybe there's some terminology. I mean, I even made a note. Is it locally hereby amended? Is it not even the word hereby? It's more
Locally referred
more
as,
current. At this moment, it's occurring.
or even like when you're just changing a title of a section, locally referred to as.
Look at that.
We can do this page by page if everybody's up for page by page, or do we want to go questions, bring up each person who has questions and issues?
These are all new additions that we're putting
No.
into the,
It's only strikeout, underline per job. When we modify our regulations and codes, you strikeout and underline. These that you see in here are changes to other documents. In the beginning, there's the International Property Maintenance Code, which we're adopting by this, by reference, a different code, right? This old one is 2009, there's a 2018 edition. Same thing with the Florida Building Code, there's a new adopted Florida Building Code. Everything that you see under those sections are local amendments to those documents. So
They've already
everything,
been made. Most of them
unless it
already
has a
made.
strike through underline, it's not an edit.
So for like 6-2, section B, section 101.1, the title locally is now referred to as these regulations shall be known as, not, we're just amending their document. They
So
have.
you adopt a bigger document by reference, and we're making it kind of our own by making the edits to it, bringing it to it as, everything else is still, it's instead of taking the whole document, the International Property Maintenance Code, and dumping it into our code. By reference with these changes. Same thing with the building code. The code always recognizes the most current version of the Florida Building Code. Property Maintenance Code doesn't. Property Maintenance Code was by year. But the building code is by whatever is adopted in current now, plus the following amendments.
can you tell me who our code official is?
Official.
Makes these determinations that things are unfit, unsafe, uninhabitable?
That would be the building official.
Who is who?
Jack McStravick is the town acting building official.
Okay, and so
He's a licensed building official.
if, my question is there a process that this goes through once, he decides this is unsafe, whatever, tags it, and, then it's either scheduled for demolition or whatever? Is there any recourse that the people have that own the property to go to a board, a hearing, something to question?
Yeah, I don't know the exact process. I believe they can appeal it to the Florida, I forget the name of the board, isn't it?
There's a process.
There's a state board that can be, but they have to
But
document.
nobody
it.
reviews what this code person does. It's strictly up to him to decide
Well,
yea or
it's-
nay.
let's not get confused with code person from a code enforcement versus a building official,
Okay,
which has a different license and different, but they are authorized by the state of Florida to make those determinations. They have to document that.
okay, this isn't just an employee.
I believe on page 11,
Yeah, so we're very clear. It is the Florida building, the building official is designated by the town, which is a formal position specified and required by the state of Florida and state law. Has to meet certain minimum qualifications, go through a minimum testing, be certified under the Florida Building Code and under the International Maintenance Code. He is the official, or she, as the case may be, designated with the responsibility to make the initial determination that a structure is unsafe.
Makes me feel better.
That's the
Thank you.
responsibility of the floor, of the building official.
On
me feel
page
better.
11 of 30, if you go to section 111.1.
That's
does
where,
talk- It
that's
does
where I
talk
was-
about an appeal to town council.
yes, okay. Okay,
I was gonna say, prior to that, there's a very set process he has to go through. Kind of writing up reports and unsafe conditions and filing it with people.
Got a little typo on page 10. Page 10, L, first sentence, if
I got it too.
if the owner of the subject is subject to a code enforcement.
It's a tough document to read.
That's why it hasn't been updated in,
It's
Long
tough.
time.
This
It's,
is a tough document to read.
and the building official helped, and Carl was helping with this, but trying to go back and check the
Believe me,
references.
I can tell you that what you have before you has been edited down, because what staff provided to me was the entirety of the chapter, and where you see the little, the asterisks, under formatting for ordinance preparation according to community code, that means that we're skipping sections, because nothing's changing in there. So, those sections were previously there.
What I try to do with you is, if we have changes between sections and subsections, I try to include the content there, but like I said before, the last half of this chapter isn't even included because there wasn't any changes to it, so there's no sense in providing it for.
And
I try to avoid that part where there's a break of 2 or 3 sections and it picks up again. Makes it tough to read.
And I don't know how the rest of the group feels, but I read through this, and obviously the strikes and underlines is what I focused on, but I read the entire thing. Some of it's already in our code. I had some questions, and I don't know appropriate time and place to look at those broader questions. And more from a question from staff, and when you guys make further edits, you might want to look into those things.
I think now getting some of that feedback is appropriate. This is a very difficult type of document, edit in a vacuum.
Go ahead. She'll come back.
Well, I'm okay with going page to page, because I've got a few throughout, so we can just pass if there's nothing, and just,
No, okay, do you want to go or you want him to go with his questions?
it doesn't matter, he's talking, go ahead, I've got things I've gotta make sure that I,
Go ahead.
page 11 on the appeals, section 111.1. Just wondering about the 20 days. Typically for almost any permit, municipal permit or approval, zoning approval, whatever, it's a 30-day appeal period for third parties to be able to interject. So this gives someone 20 days to appeal a decision made. I was wondering, is that standard? And S,
who can they get into in 20 days? Feel it, I mean,
We have to receive it within 20 days.
and the question just being, most of what I'm used to seeing, 30 days for the idea of maybe making that standard if that's the case.
I like that.
yeah.
And can I correct, I said the building official because I got down the road of code-related stuff, so it's really kind of a team effort, right? So this is a mixed bag of regulations. There's property maintenance codes, there's building codes. While it's adopted in the land development code, a community development director is superseded by the building official. So while there is reference to development director, maybe code enforcement, that sort of thing, ultimately when it comes to building, right, Jonathan, if it's a building code issue, ultimately, if somebody's condemning a building and saying that it's unsafe and actually blah, 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 all that, the building official is going to make that call, not a broader than my simple statement.
on page 12. Why? For your storage? Question was, if, if I'm building on one property, am I allowed to pull a permit or through my building permit, ask to store on a separate property? Allowed?
So that would refer back to, basically, it's the property maintenance section, right? So it's saying we don't want stuff stored on properties unless you have a permit for it. We've talked about temporary use permits. We had this question last week or the week before about temporary storage, not buildings, but storage units, pods, those things. Contractors use them sometimes for storage of construction equipment for on-site, if it's a smaller job type thing. Those are dealt with in the Chapter 34 Land Development Code of when and how to get those. And so otherwise, this is just saying keep your property clean. And
So if you have a vacant piece of land and you have a boat lift, a boat trailer, you can't put your boat trailer on that vacant land. Or even an enclosed trailer for your cushions and things like that for your boat.
For our structure.
the Land Development Code temporary use talks about the only storage buildings, temporary storage buildings you can have on site are the construction equipment and materials related to.
A vacant piece of property should not have anything on it at all.
Without other permits, yes, unless there's some other temporary use that was approved in the Chapter 34 to offer something.
So, this is,
This is
number
dealing with
two
both such a thing.
is not dealing with, it doesn't say vacant in that sentence. Is this vacant or habitable properties? You can't have equipment, like if someone wants to have their exercise equipment outside.
We've used it. I've used it on our street because somebody's storing building materials in their front yard. I mean, there's 4 toilets sitting in the front yard of a neighbor 4 doors down, and we've
Flowers in them.
We've called because, well, and then there's 4 water heaters, and then there's 2 of this happens down the street for me.
So if you're planning on doing a small job of, building a planting box or something, you have those materials in your yard, is that an issue?
But that's not storage. I mean, you're actively building something. This is when it sits for, how I would interpret this is it sits for 6 weeks.
The obvious, don't
Yeah,
store old dishwashers and washing
Okay,
machines.
but
right?
I'm talking about exercise equipment. Is that an issue? A lot of people have outdoor gyms.
I mean, so the second part to this talks about trying to delineate some of that, I think. That's really more the storage, and I would assume, number 2, really more applied when you have a house there or something. You have an area underneath that's not enclosed, and there's some things being stored that may be not supposed to be there. But I mean, it even talks about interior furniture versus outdoor furniture.
There's also, okay, so outdoor furniture can be just outdoor on the property anywhere.
Right, I mean, this specifically references interior furniture.
Well, there is some of that around.
Oh.
But
But you see why they're doing it, though. The point of it is to see an indoor couch sitting in the front yard. How much do you enjoy seeing that?
or sitting on
Not
it.
at all.
So this is related to maintenance. My question was, does Chapter 34 allow you to get a permit? And again, it goes back to discussion we had last time of, we're on a tight island, construction sites it's difficult to fit everything on. If there's a vacant lot next door where you can ask for a permit to store heavy machinery while you're constructing, that was just the question of, is that allowed in 34? And if so, I'm okay with this language. I just wanted to know if it was allowed.
So it ties back to the conversation we had before, which, no, there is not an avenue by which to have a lot for storage of equipment for that type of thing that we talked about. Obviously, you're allowed to have storage and that sort of thing on site with a building permit. gets into a little bit what we talked about last time, but this would say, without that, continue to have that permit, then this store things. And to keep the property clean. Property appearance.
So just to know, when you guys look at chapter 34, if you do, maybe allowing that and then making this consistent with 34, if that's the case.
Well, it does say, whatever 34 says, you have to get the permits for that process. 34 just doesn't happen to allow
Yeah.
right now, right? I don't think anybody's asking in the rain that gets put on the property, junk or
Oh,
extra couches
Right.
or.
definitely need a
Right.
permit, and it would have to be in my
Right,
mind.
and there is no permit to put
Yeah.
the indoor couch.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, in chapter 34, if you wanted to store heavy machinery next door, and you've got permission from the owner, and it can alleviate,
This is not addressing exercise equipment, just because there's a lot of those.
There is? I've only known one place.
There's a lot.
So I would assume that
Right,
code
right,
enforcement has some leeway, you know,
Backyard,
John,
nobody
if
cares.
you had broken,
Well, not
rusted
gonna
down
see it.
equipment sitting in the side yard or front yard versus, I mean, it's obviously actively being used
Yes.
or something. There's a big difference between those.
Curious. Wanted to-
So if this exercise equipment down on the stair road, it's sitting in the side yard and the front yard, is not allowed by this code right here.
Depending on the condition, I'd have to. Obviously, there's a difference between the front half of a car sitting in your driveway versus a car with license plate, you know.
if no one's got anything else, I'm
Um,
on page 14 next.
I'm still on 12, if you, hang on a second. There, Z, residential pools must comply, I have a note of residential pools must comply, what's that note?
Last sentence, is that what you're?
Yes, I think so,
It flips over to the next page.
right.
State Residential Swimming Pool Safety Act.
It's just open-ended and I go with what?
She's looking. To be clear, on 302.3, sidewalks, driveways is hereby amended to read as follows. All sidewalks, walkways, stairs, driveways, parking spaces, and similar areas shall be kept in a proper state of repair and maintained free from hazardous conditions. This means the owner of the property has to do that, correct?
Which section? You said 3.
302.3, page 12, second paragraph. I want to make sure it's on record because all those people just got brand new sidewalks. All the way up and down this island that probably didn't have them, didn't have them before. Page 12, second paragraph. That if you have a sidewalk in front of your house, you are now responsible to maintain that.
Yes, especially the hedges and bushes and things that could encroach. And if you remember, there's also some revisions that were done to the land development code related to fences out front and hedges and other vegetation where there's additional setback. A little bit more restrictive than this, I believe, in the land development code. So yes, from a maintenance perspective, at a minimum there, then you also kind of support those measurements with additional regulations in the land development code. Scott, if you remember the fence setback conversation.
This is,
Separation from the edge of pavement, gates, other fences that go up near the property, trying to provide room so we're not damaging things if we're doing maintenance, encroachments because of handlebars of bikes, all those types of.
you are mentioning shrubs and trees and stuff of this sort. Who's actually responsible for the concrete of that sidewalk? I mean, I took it to mean that they're also responsible for in proper state of repair and maintenance from hazardous conditions. Also meant not necessarily.
I don't believe so. No, I mean, you can't block it.
No, what I mean though is that, you know, if a crack forms in that sidewalk in front of somebody's house on the stair road, now who's fixing that?
Public right of way, that's a town, or
Well, not always, because
or
some
FDOT.
towns, like where I came from up north, it was my responsibility.
It was an easement on your property. that could have been the case. It could have been on your property.
Same with the plantings that are between the sidewalk and the road, too. The town has that as well, I would assume.
I want to make sure we're all, that this is clear. Now I think it's still a little muddy.
Well,
Yeah,
It ought to be the town
Okay,
ones that
I'll,
put
I'll
the
jump
sidewalk
in.
in.
Okay,
and I was hesitating because
As
it involves
Art
driveway.
has kind of been mentioned here, there's full distinctions here, as it relates to Estero Boulevard. I understand it. The road construction, the road and the sidewalks that that are being built, by Lee County, completely within their right of way.
okay.
So, county, unless the county has a regulation similar to this, the county's responsible for what takes place on their property. Maintenance code is for, and part of the development of your property. The town usually says, well, you need to put in a sidewalk as part, or there's a sidewalk that's already there that you have to maintain. If, for, you know, if, to your question, if a tree, an oak tree, branches extend, roots extend, goes the sidewalk on your property, you're responsible for, under this code, for repairing that damage. Because it's taking place in your property as a result of actions, or if you were to drop, you know, a heavy weight, on something heavy on the sidewalk and the sidewalk shatters, then you would be responsible for repairing it.
That's duly if it is on your property.
I can't speak to, you know, what Lee County's, maintenance, schedule is and what they do with regard to their right of way. But, you know, to your point of, well, all of you all just inherited sidewalks and you need to be responsible for maintenance, I would not make that statement because I don't know where those sidewalks are.
And I'm not making a statement, I just I want to know, you know, does this all of a sudden come into play when there's a crack in a sidewalk out in front and somebody, ding, 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 here comes code enforcement, you know.
I mean,
you got an
but
issue.
remember, it's
I just
primarily,
want to make sure we're clear
it's
on it.
primarily
Town employees.
primarily property maintenance, right? So
Yeah, I agree.
This is more
your
like-
property needs to be maintained.
My house on Estero, I've got, if the palm trees start encroaching on the sidewalk or when somebody's riding their bike, I'm responsible to make sure that
And I get, yeah, but I was just mostly more concerned about, we've just all inherited sidewalks and we inherited property on
We
this.
haven't, I'd be
I know.
careful to say that we've inherited because that's county right of way.
That's fine.
Is the sidewalk belong to the
As long as
county or
it's
the
county
town?
Understanding as it does,
The county?
yes.
Okay, that's what I thought too.
And I think every
wanna make
roadway is
sure.
classified as either privately maintained or publicly maintained. Publicly maintained. So if you have something emanating from your property, encroaching upon it or causing damage, that's different. But normal wear and tear, if it's publicly maintained, the public is responsible for maintaining.
I think that, you know, one of the issues that you have when you're dealing with code sections like this that are, in fact, you know, generated, be adopted by multiple jurisdictions across, you know, state lines and different places, like this one is, you end up with generalizations. And as we've explained before, sometimes that is why you customize some of these codes, as we're doing here. I think that where this particular section generally applies, and I always be careful, you know, about generalizations, is a development built by and there's not hardly any in Fort Myers Beach, where there's 100 acres of raw land, developer or whatever company comes in, plats it, master develops it, and everyone's got sidewalks.
And I get it, I just,
That's where this section would then come into play.
Yeah, but, you know, many of us played up, you know, lived up north, came in, especially in our little town, was when, you know, the sidewalks sitting
Yeah,
in front of us were our, which was a bone of contention for everyone. I just wanted to see, you know, because we don't have any very clear answer on that, just make sure.
Yeah, so I think there's a difference between property maintenance and obviously right-of-way. And
I do want to emphasize, however, that there is language in this section 302.3 that potentially applies even if the sidewalk is publicly owned. For example, the clearance, if you have shrubs or trees that are overhanging, and, you know, I have seen instances where property owners have been by code enforcement because, you know, the oak tree is so over, you know, it goes over into, and not just the sidewalk, but into the street to where, you know, trucks, you know, normal sized trucks can't pass because it hasn't been trimmed back. So in this particular section, in this particular instance, then that particular property owner would potentially be subject to a citation or notice of violation issued by code enforcement for violation of section 30.2.3.
Yeah, and that's pretty clear, I mean, that's, it is actually physically on your property and you're responsible for its limbs. All right,
On this page, still on page 13, under CC, are we really going to regulate people have screens in 24/7? Because, I mean, like, up north, people take their screens out, wash them, put them away for the winter. Down here, people take their screens out for the summer, wash them and put them away, so that they have clear windows looking out instead of having a screen to look
I
out,
think
because
it
they
was
got
for
air
food
conditioning.
preparation, so it would apply to like restaurants, the way I read it,
Is that the way it is?
the section.
yes, 304.14, screens is hereby amended as to follow.
It says every window in a residential structure.
Yeah, I think that if you read the entirety of the section, I think it's really designed toward establishment locations.
Okay, but it does say residential structures, so that doesn't usually happen in a residential structure, food preparation for commercial.
well, it's my understanding, building code requires screens on all the windows anyway. I can check with Jack on that.
I agree.
Every window I've had put in, they say, we can't get our CO until,
And
Put the screen in.
I understand what you're saying, but I think that the reference to residential structure, which it does say that, I'm not disagreeing, is at the beginning of this, of the sentence, it's one clause of a very long sentence that pretty much every other section of it really refers to specifically food preparation areas.
Maybe we should change residential on that.
I would also just point out that
Henry?
this is a section of the code that is unstricken, which this is how it reads currently. Not changing it, and it hasn't been changed. This is what we've had now for close to 2 years.
we'll confirm with the building official and go over that section, and we'll clear that up.
I'm just curious.
If there's any necessary edits to that, then
I mean, a lot of people with dogs, big dogs, they take the screens out so they don't get torn up, so they don't look like that, because some screens are in the inside. And, well, the screens are on the.
Question for page 14, DG. So this is with regards to screening of mechanical equipment. And would that apply to ACs on rooftops?
yes, and I also believe that's consistent with the Chapter 34 of the Land Development Code with equipment, roof requirements, for commercial design
I know
standards.
there's a lot of multifamily buildings with ACs on top that are not screened individually. I think if we were to put lattice work on around each little AC, it would look way worse than an AC.
Not to mention hurricane-proof, you
Yeah,
can't.
you'd have all this flying.
So,
Oh, they're coming off in a hurricane.
and it doesn't seem like this is something that's been enforced, because we see brand new ACs with no screening.
Right.
But I think you guys might want to look at it where, I don't know what the application is, but if it's truly for ACs on rooftops being screened, I can think of multiple examples where we don't have that. And
course.
Oh,
also,
you mean at the site of the equipment isn't screened, or it's not screened from view?
screen from view, it says from
Our
right of
current,
way.
our current commercial design standards for the town's design standards require that.
That's commercial, but what about well, none of the condos have them. All their ACs are on.
You don't see them from the, most of the rooftop
Okay.
ones
So
you're not seeing.
parapet walls, other architectural features, those types of things are what the commercial design standards actually recommend and require for you from off-site, for off-site viewing essentially, or from adjacencies. So, I don't know what the other ones are designed to, but that's a requirement. And that's all I read here is it talks about screening from view. So if you have something where it's kind of out front, then you have to figure out a way to screen that equipment. Most of them are going to be in the middle of the roof, kind of, they cluster them together. Maybe there's a parapet wall or some type of thing screening that from view, right of way or from adjacent properties.
I have another one.
We were just talking about screens. I think it's a different term, right?
Also,
Yeah.
also point out the part of that sentence, any new.
Oh.
Not existing. And yeah, moving forward, yes, as staff has indicated, the idea is the best practices is to have regulations that provide for the screening of that to minimize visual impact.
It was actually a part of the conversation with TPI, because height was such a big deal. Limiting a height limited potentially the opportunities to screen equipment, and the unintended consequences, you can have this huge equipment being exposed. So that was kind of the balance that we were required to do, because the commercial design standards require you to have that, so.
On EE, page 14 top, every hall or stairway in a residential occupancy has to have lighting 24/7. There is, I would say this is really not being done on exterior stairways and things like that.
And this is perspective, not retroactive. And this, again, these are minimum standards that are developed by industry experts. And frankly, the idea here is safety.
Mhm.
And, unfortunately, in the business that I'm in, I am all too familiar with attorneys and law firms that specialize in bringing regulation security
Sure.
claims.
Sure.
This is what this is designed to address.
And it's my understanding, building code requires most of that, and then obviously the edits are our local favor here with the eternal requirements, so we have to be compliant with both.
I checked that because I flagged that because we just moved the turtle lighting ordinance regulations, I think, out of the LDC. We adopted new regulations just about 6 months ago, so this reference may be incorrect.
I will follow up on that.
We're kind of going page by page. Anything on 15? On the 16th?
Right, hang on. So, relating to a housing board.
Where are you?
Okay, I'm sorry. On page 15, under number 4, chapter 1, number 4, at the very last paragraph.
Exception, section
Yeah.
105, 106, 107? Okay.
Yeah, relating to a housing board of adjustments and appeals. Are are deleted. Do we have a housing board? Deleted. So,
Make that change.
so how are things being processed if we don't have a board anymore?
We'll change it to specify the LPA, as I
Oh, okay.
mentioned before.
Okay, sorry.
So that exception, it does refer, I mean, chapter 34 of the Land Development Code spells out the processes for variance.
Okay,
It's got the procedural part to it of who's responsible, your responsibilities with this, with the
Okay.
processes, it has all that in there.
I have a quick question about process. It was back to when we were talking about the transfer of ownership back on that page 10. When somebody is undergoing or in the process of having a problem with their property, are they made aware of their requirement under this to disclose to any potential new purchaser of the property that this is undergoing? Because not everyone chooses to, even when properly asked, if there's anything happening, chooses to make that known. And so I'm just curious if that's part of the process that the town notifies in the event that you should choose to sell your property or whatever. You are required by this code to notify any particular, next owner that you have this ongoing issue with the.
In the context of code enforcement, it's a state law requirement. And the property owner who fails to disclose that the property is a subject of code enforcement proceeding do so at their own peril.
100%.
We don't, as a matter of course, the town, unless the prospective purchaser comes to the town and as part of their due diligence inquires about pending code enforcement matters or past code enforcement matters, the town doesn't normally say, hey, you need to make sure that if you ever sell your property that, because frankly, the town isn't aware when a property necessarily goes on the market or doesn't.
Understood. It just seems like sometimes that process, I mean, first of all, maybe it's probably a non-issue in most cases because it's the types of things that are going to create this type of situation are going to probably be very apparent to anyone, so they would likely come and inquire. However, I just know sometimes that process can be very, very lengthy. And so I just was curious if that was something that owners were, if it was part of that process of going through, that they would be notified that, because it certainly affects the value of a property, and
We
a
just had a
pending
case.
owner needs to be aware, and so I guess it's just have them inquire at the town.
I think that and we certainly can speak to this, I think that as the marketplace becomes more sophisticated, both on the seller and the buyer side, it's very common, particularly for lenders, to require a prospective purchaser who's borrowing the money to say, hey, have you looked into what's the title situation? What's the title report on
Well,
this
there'll
particular
definitely
piece
be
of property?
title, no, there's,
Well,
that's
and
not.
that's where normally those records would show up. But, otherwise the town wouldn't know that this is happening unless again, someone through the process of due diligence comes to the town and says, this property is in the process of being sold. Can you please tell us if there's any outstanding code enforcement issues or liens or unpaid water bills,
I understand all that part of it. I guess I was just thinking through at what point in the process would it be documented in some of these other places, and anyway.
Well, and part of the process, part of the problem, I think, is that we used to be able to go online and see permits and whether they were CO'd and whether they had a permit for this or what, in listing the house, we know what should be there, but when there isn't, then we try to go find out when it was built, if it was built with code. And we can no longer do that. And that is really, I think that's really bad. Should be, it is public record and you can come up here, but with the thing on lockdown, this can't become 30 Realtors' office either.
You make an appointment.
Oh, yes. And the day with you.
That works well.
I wouldn't go that far.
Fixie track it. There's plenty of good people that can fix that.
Why can't we do that? I realize that it was hacked, but we can't be afraid ever. We're going to be hacked again.
free to ask the clerk and the town manager and that inquiry and get back to you.
I'm sure.
Don't
To
hold
pay
your
for
breath.
the 15-cent page that it gets sent to me on.
I'm not an IT
We're
professional.
not doing it. Okay. Page 16. Recovering the cost of, or the very bottom, chapter 7. Covering the cost of repair. So the town is going to take on the demolition if they choose to say that it needs to be demolished? And then put liens on them?
I believe essentially, yes. Which one, which subsection are you talking about?
Last paragraph on the page, page 16.
But that's already mentioned two other places that will go after that, and liens on it if you don't pay for it. Mentioned over here, way back, well, that will collect fees.
Same thing, if you
So
don't
the-
mow your lot, they can send someone to mow it and then charge you for it.
How much you charge?
Just asking. Good deal.
It's hard to find a good mower.
And then my local maintenance
Yeah.
guy.
Program. Not here, not here.
How much is your contractor? And is he reliable?
Yeah. Will they come twice a month?
No.
All right, so any other questions on 16, 17?
You notice the change, it's getting it more into building codes, the property maintenance here. Oh, and just to point out again, it basically delegates to Lee County Board of, the building stuff related. So when there's a question about a contractor or something like that, it goes to them.
Okay, so on 6-42 on 17, when we strike out criminal penalties and civil penalties, and the town may institute in any court before administrative board of competent jurisdiction, struck that all out, what does that ultimately do? What is, are we
It-
referring back to some other
Yeah, it refers back to our general penalties.
On the next page, section 6-45, do
Moving on
we
to page
have
18.
a fee schedule that is posted?
Yes.
Where?
On the town's website, I believe it's in the, probably under finance department, there's a all departments and schedule. It's adopted with a budget every year in September.
It gets adopted as part of the budget process every year.
Or under, say it again, under the
I
town?
believe there's, last time I checked, there was a link for this current fiscal year fee schedule under finance. They have all the past fee schedules, or at least all the current fee schedule, and then past ordinances of budget. Haven't looked on the site in a couple months, but that's where it was.
I actually have it up right now, so hold on, I'll tell you for sure.
Why does that, any other questions on 18? 19?
19, I just wanted to point out, if you look at section 6-82D, that's an example of typical 30-day appeal process. Back to that comment of make it consistent.
And I noticed in that other area that, too, it didn't, whether it was calendar day.
So back on page 11, section 111-1, 111-1, 20 days, 30 calendar days. Page 20. 21.
It's on the link at, under finance, under budget, fiscal year 2021 fee schedule,
Under budget, okay. Good answer, Jason.
finance webpage.
I didn't have the URL code for you.
I
Thank
can
you.
give that to you too as well.
Oh, that's okay.
You have a phone app like this?
Yeah.
Interesting that on 21, we have very specific dates for inspections and stuff of that sort after what we saw yesterday on TV
This,
with Matanzas.
there's so many things that can go wrong with that. And, hurricanes, just material delays with COVID, just unbelievable things that can back up a system. And, I mean, I have that problem with people having to, we give them 30 days to do something. I mean, if they were in control of the architect and the engineers and the material being delivered and the builder, that's all great if you were that one person that had all those titles. But when you have other people that have to do those things, I am a little concerned about having definite dates they have to be by.
No, remember, I mean, most of the section is, well, basically pulled out of the building code. I don't know exact wording that's different, but again, it's building officials' responsibility to determine if it's a reasonable request. It also puts the impetus on the contractor, whoever, to make a formal request, not wait 60 days after the deadline expired and give the reasoning for that, right? And so material, supply, lumber, all those types of things that you can see 30, 60 days out, don't wait till the day after expiration. But to me, I always have read these as flexibility on both parties to make those adjustments. But again, the goal is always on the building side is to keep things
Get it
moving.
done. Yeah.
Right? And
You don't get paid till you get it done.
don't want things exposed to elements too long,
Or if you have an owner contractor, 3 years to get a house done.
And we do have those questions. We do. If I get an
Yes.
inspection every
seen it
6 months, that means I can build it for
Happens.
4 years.
It does happen.
So that's not the intent,
Yeah.
but.
I would be hesitant to pull that out, just
Latin America.
the idea it prevents the 4-year house, the 3-year house.
Before, wait a year.
All right, 22,
Oh. Moving forward.
and 23 is door, we're back to the doors. Do we want to discuss the doors here a little bit, or just remove it and it's, move it on?
But yeah, it's 3 and 4 is the conversation.
I just had a question for 20. Know what the intent is, the not temperature control. Obviously, we want to quit having build a livable space. But even for storage, so just for mold issues and everything, you can't have temperature control in the storage area?
Yeah, apparently this section and part of that, I think, ties back into the regs and intent. We had this conversation about, you have some buildings that are elevated multiple feet above the base flood elevation. That creates gap between the bottom of the roof of the garage and then your base flood. So you, in theory, by code, you could put electrical outlets and fixtures and those things between that space. However, the provisions don't allow the space to be cooled.
Is that a FEMA or state regulation, or is that?
That is a local based on guidance.
I'm struggling with that one because I'll tell you, almost every one of those garages and everything are air conditioned right now, or under conditioned air.
Well, and some of them really need to be, because there is mold.
Boring.
I
Stuff
mean, it's
molds-
horrible.
Stuff molds pretty quickly.
I mean, there's,
Vehicles.
I won't mention, but there are houses that go into the downstairs and you go, oh my gosh, the smell because of moisture. And it's like, I wouldn't want to put my car in it.
And I've been in some of these houses where there's classic cars all over the garages and it's air conditioned, and
Sure.
there's
Yeah,
a bar
of course.
downstairs and.
Right.
Well, when you enclose a
There's
space and
nothing.
seal it up, this environment, you create mold opportunity. Happens.
But I guess what I'm saying though is that we're really not enforcing this, are we?
No, I wouldn't say that. It's an ongoing conversation about one section of codes, regulations that here's what you have to do, or here's the minimum standards to make sure. The conversation that we were having internally was, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that may, when you put it together with the other things, not allow you to do those other things. So regular code say all your fixtures and outlets and that thing need to be above flood for minimum needed for safety. Doesn't mean you can all of a sudden then start air conditioning space with a split unit below flood. So
And
the point was we were trying internally to make sure that we were all aware that we're looking in both in 3 and 4 places to make sure that the layers are being done appropriately.
And I would just ask if staff can highlight that and something to look at in the future. And the reason is, and I fully understand the intent behind this. But again, if we say it's not livable space, we need to reinforce that by no AC when people have valid reasons. They might have classic cars that are worth a ton of money that they want to keep mold-free. They might have legit storage below. And again, I understand the reason, but I don't know if it's really needed. So something.
It's also those classic cars being stored 50 feet from the Gulf, you know?
They're not restored, they're stored.
So,
In case there's multiple lifts and.
Yeah, but how many times I mean, we have had hurricanes, we are at a risk for hurricanes, but in the last 30 years, there's probably all but 3 or 4 years, those classic cars would have been fine.
I can go on record and say, from a regulatory perspective, storing expensive things is not the best place to do it at the beach
Exactly.
level. But however, to that point is, again, it's that balance of regulations to try to help prevent misuse of space. But then the onus is on us as a town to enforce that. And we don't have the tools right now to follow up and enforce and ensure, to your point, that things are being converted. In the flood ordinance regulations, if we had stronger tools, then maybe you can give some leeway on some other things. So for example, FEMA encourages you and CRS encourages you because they want to make sure that you're following up, that if you make every property owner that builds a house and then closes the downstairs part, they sign a form that then grants the town the ability to enter, that you get the max amount of points for CRS. Most towns don't want to grant that authority or stop that regulation because it makes them uncomfortable about government interaction, right? So those are the extremes example, but the point is finding that middle ground that's right for everybody is the challenge. The more AC space you have, the more we're going to have to work on conversion. And John knows how many conversions and arguments about conversions and was it a conversion or not that we've had in the last.
I can tell you that you know, I've dealt over the years very extensively with FEMA on the implementation and enforcement of the National Flood Insurance Program, and it's not fun. Okay, they periodically audit local governments throughout the country, and where they identify local government jurisdictions that aren't enforcing or allowing, however you want to say it, habitable space downstairs. And habitable space is having electrical, unless it's above flood elevation. You know, these things, their remedy is to exclude you from the flood insurance program, and all of a sudden you no longer have the ability as a property owner to obtain flood insurance at a subsidized rate by the federal government. You don't want that as a community.
And I believe, they can even suspend the whole community from
They
being
have.
able to
They have.
participate in
And
the program.
They've required different, here in Florida, various jurisdictions to create an inspection program that before someone could renew their flood insurance program, they had to have the insurance adjuster inspect the downstairs enclosure, certify that it wasn't being used for habitable space, and under penalty of the community being excluded from the flood insurance program.
I guess what I'm feeling is like we're spinning our wheels because the tools that you have right now aren't working. I'll tell you, I've been in a lot of, you haven't because you guys work for Fort Myers Beach, and they're not going to let you have a drink in their bar downstairs or sit in their great room right next to the pool. But the tools that we have right now, I mean, those spaces are all being converted.
Not just in Lee County, up and down the coast of
Yeah.
Florida.
So
Let's
these
not,
tools
let's
are-
not say all, we are following up and enforcing for the record, if anybody.
Well, I mean,
But my point
you
is
go
that-
and
State FEMA's
you go and
watching, please.
inspect it, and then you give them this certificate of occupancy, and then all of a sudden it's closed in. You have no idea what's going on in
And
these
after
places.
the fact, we just had this conversation with Daphne this week, after the fact is a challenge, right? And our ability and rights as a town to follow up and investigate is limited. You know, it's pictures from the neighbor walking by, you gotta go, if the neighbor lets us on their property, you can see him from a window. We don't wanna be peeking through people's windows, that's ridiculous. So, we don't have the tools to be able to investigate some of these things if they're true. And the telltale signs for us is when someone comes in for an electrical or mechanical permit to put in a split system in their newly enclosed place that just got the CO, that just got finished, and now they wanna come back and do something different, they're probably gonna try to convert the space.
Well, here's the problem.
Especially
I
when
thought
there's
the
tile
builder's
in
putting
there,
that in. You
and
have
all of a
no
sudden
idea
they-
it goes in. The builders is putting that in, or my friend who works for the HVAC company went and got it put in there, and you have no idea it's being put in. I bet you in much of this case.
I will investigate that component to clarify for you where the basis of that comes from, but my opinion on that is without other tools to help enforce what happens after that, that's all we have.
What are the other tools? I guess is the question.
Things, I mean, great, stronger tools of being able to investigate and get on properties and see what's going on when we,
Stuff that's beyond our purview here in this room.
if you can't see it from the sidewalk, at this point, you know, there's other tools that are available to us that we could implement, but we have to have a conversation about those tools, because those come with cons also. Yeah, I mean, is the town ready, the extreme, as my example, is the town ready to adopt, where everybody that gets a building permit signs a form that says we have the right for entry to investigate if there's a report? Probably not. Is there a middle ground there? I don't know. But those are the things that we need to discuss to, I think, to offset something. If you let this go, we need some other tools to enforce and
Thing that gets like discussed and hammered out like at for cities meetings and things like this, because to me, what I'm hearing in some of this conversation is sort of tools in the way that the town can adopt certain, you know, some of these regulations and everything, but it's got an impact in terms of what's happening in the communities around us as well. So if we were to get very, you know, restrictive in how we handle things, but somebody could go, you know, the next town north or south of us and do whatever, which, you know, is happening. I'm curious, like, if that's something that gets discussed at some of these meetings, like, I mean, I'm just curious about it.
I think most of you're
Because
gonna
the
get,
competitive piece
right,
of it.
most of those meetings, you're gonna get the, experience. This is what happened when we did A, B, and C.
This, yeah.
It's a tolerance thing. It's
Yes.
what is important to you. You know, we made a great effort the last 2 years to get up to a 5 in the CRS rating, which is a tremendous accomplishment. A 25% discount on everybody's insurance, or not everybody. Yes, on this island, basically everybody's. That's great. How are you gonna keep that? And how are you gonna continue to move forward to maintain that? Those are questions. How do we do that? And how do we not get, like John said, you know, in trouble?
Yeah, right.
One of the things that we had to improve on was we got audited, and they came down and said, you're not doing a good job of driving around and finding the contractors who are going beyond their scope of work. We made more improvements to make sure that we were following up on that. So, you know, those are it's a choice.
Balance.
It is, and to your point, there's a lot of variables there, so it's hard to say we did exactly this, and so go ahead and do that exact thing. But that's why we're having this conversation, right? It's not isolated. It is related to several other things. The other steps, the tools that I'm talking about, can be adopted or incorporated as part of the flood ordinance revisions. There's a time that we're gonna have that, and that's on the top of the list to have that conversation.
But with that, I mean, we are CSR 5. To improve, are we just looking to stay there or improve it? I mean, is there so many points and we're so far away from the points to get to the next level that it's prohibitive for us, or
Oh, but
we go out of balance, or?
everything costs money, right? So
Well,
it's
I thought to get to the next level, we had to have at least so many acres of passive whatever, and we can't even,
well, people said that about 5 too. That's an easy way to get a large chunk of points. In most cities, can't do that, have a hard time with that, because they don't usually have huge swaths of open space. Cape Coral's got they got huge preserves and national forests and that sort of thing as part of their incorporated limits, so they have an opportunity. Counties can get those points very easily, because they usually have huge parks, natural areas. But there's other ways to do the points. It's just every manual that comes out, it gets a little more challenging and it reshifts. We already know there's going to be points that we're going to lose on the next manual, but there's opportunities to gain other points. So it's not just for the discount, it's also the cost of staff and the public to follow through. It's great to say we want to get 10,000 points, but the
I think
process, the
quality of life is also
day-to-day,
very important.
it's a full-time position to be able to keep up with this, and every month there's something we have to do, and there's outreach and mailing realtors and trying to educate them and make sure you know to put warnings on your listings and all types of, I mean, it's a constant communication process, so.
Does the town have any,
choice.
I guess they wouldn't have any way of knowing the impact of private flood insurance is starting to have an impact in Florida. More and more properties are being insured privately and not through the federal program.
I have not copped up on that, but I'm sure there's some numbers out there somewhere, and I don't think we can get specifics, but, we can look into that, and but I'm not sure.
Kristen, is this best for a much larger not today, but a larger conversation as a whole between, if we push into the new flood pieces here?
Yeah, I
Not
think so.
necessarily here today in this legislative open forum right now, but maybe a different meeting.
Yeah, but this conversation helps reset, I mean, it helps establish, this is a priority, we want to talk about this, right? And sometimes everything becomes 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, but that specific question and comment, I think, is also related to other items that we just discussed. So, yes, I mean, put a pin in it, right? That's something that we know. I don't feel comfortable recommending to you to change today, but it is tied to other sections, and that's why I said this chapter will be amended multiple times. It's hard to amend that section without doing the other sections. The time wasn't right for those other sections, so I don't want to forget about it. I want that. It sounds like that's a priority piece to this puzzle piece of the flood, basically, and it's got a lot of reach. So we want to make sure we get.
I'm still on page 23. Section R322.1.12, accessory structures. And the values on
Yes.
those. So is that value from 2014, and we can put the consumer price index on that, or is that the updated value from 2014?
So it says May. It does not include the consumer price index. That says May. And that is a very hot and heavy conversation internally because flood regulations, guidance by FEMA and other documents have different definitions for terms like garages and accessory structures. It's hard to tell if this language was written to implement some components of that. But yet our local development regulations have different definitions. So a garage in our regulations is not necessarily a garage in FEMA world, right? So that's the struggle right now that we're actually having, and we're sorting through that because there's some differences on, this includes the garages, accessory structures, right? And it talks about parking and storage. Accessory structures in FEMA, the guidelines talks about once you're a garage, no longer an accessory structure. Too big and there's stuff going on in there where you're no longer really an accessory structure. By zoning, we recognize those, especially a detached, right, garage is an accessory structure if it's smaller than the house, that type of thing. We've got this regulation, you've got our zoning regs, and you got the FEMA regs where sometimes the words don't match, and we're working through that right now. I wanted to edit this section for today, it just got to be too much to sort through because it does have ramifications on development guidelines.
The way I read it, though, I read it similar to, I think the way you read it was that 17,500 is 2014 now.
Right, and
At it today, we would put that index and that number would be bigger today.
I'm not sure what you can
It also says
build for
May.
$17,000.
It also says May. Well, but that's the point, right? You're talking about, that's also all-inclusive. It doesn't differentiate between an A zone and a V zone. We're talking about an A zone, it also has 10%.
Yeah.
If you had $1 million house,
Yeah.
could you come in and make the argument that I could do a $100,000 accessory structure?
Right.
And again, that gets into definitions and what is garage, what does accessory mean, what is all that. You think of a garage as a freestanding structure with parking, But if you add habitable space in the upper level of it, is it a garage anymore? FEMA, no. So it gets to be, then it becomes an enclosure, no space below habitable space. Whether it's a residence or whether it's just storage, it doesn't matter. It becomes, that's what we're trying to deal with right now. It's hard to tell if this was trying to implement a vision that's in the FEMA regulations related to, basically it says accessory, I think it says this, I'm going to paraphrase here, but accessory structures cannot be allowed in V zones unless your local flood ordinance says it can be and defines them and basically sets a price and size and all that. For example, was $500, 100 square feet, and it was really for storage sheds. But then again, we don't want all these storage sheds all over the ground in the V zone, right?
Right.
So this doesn't exactly do everything that that section of the FEMA regs was saying you should do. So it's hard to tell if that's what the attempt was, but it's there. So that's what we're going back and forth on right now. We want to edit that. We want to clarify that. But again, we've got, like I said, multiple terms that have different definitions depending on which bubble we're in, zoning, building code, or FEMA.
Your idea to edit it would be broader, or?
To try to make sure we're not allowing something with unintended consequences. I can foresee regulations that accidentally allow a builder to do something more than what we want. Be vague here, frankly. I don't want to give away too much. Makes sense.
Okay, I mean, like I have a garage that's separate from my house, I'd like to connect them.
Okay.
So,
This mostly has to do with freestanding structures. So there's a difference when, especially in the FEMA regulations, when you're doing what they call a lateral addition, which is actually easier to do, harder to do from the structure standpoint, easier to do on a regulatory standpoint. Physically attaching and connecting a structure to your house, lateral addition. Freestanding or by a breezeway or some other is not in the FEMA rules. Our zoning regs allow you to do a garage with a breezeway to the house. And so we've had conversations about pools, right? This body has done variances for pools. You can't do a pool in front of your house. You did a breezeway in a garage. Our zoning regs allow you to do the pool up to the garage. Now you've extended the facade of the house. FEMA doesn't recognize that. It's not what times you can't do that garage out there. They don't care that you have the breezeway. They want it physically connected. Hopefully Carl's gonna come over and hit me that I didn't say. We've been talking about this for the last 2 days, so it's fresh in our minds of realizing the complexities of this versus the FEMA regs versus trying to work through it.
okay,
Now, if your conversation is that's not enough, again, it goes to context of what format is it not enough, right? If we're doing an addition to your house and adding a garage onto it, that's different than a freestanding. We want freestanding garages in V zones, probably not. But then again, we have a lot of, cottage homes and stuff that's the only way they can have garage space.
Are we running into the 10% market value being too limited? I mean, are you getting requests that really, that,
No,
I
honestly,
wouldn't think
I'll be-
so, that's why I'm
I'll be honest with
asking.
you,
That's why I'm asking.
I think it's an
Why
underused.
now?
No, I think it's an underused provision that nobody really knows what to do with.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it would seem like the 10% market value would be sufficient in most.
I think it's a forgotten provision that nobody knows about. That nobody,
So
that we have
everyone's
forgotten about and
focusing
don't.
on the
And it
17.5?
conflicts with everything else. So it's not the dollar amount, but what it means by the types of uses. If it differentiated between A and V, that'd be fine, but there's huge differences on the FEMA side, basically, that between the A's and the V. That's something we talked about, is creating maybe in an A zone, fine, whatever, things there you can do, but a V zone, it's a lot different.
And then that's a moving target too, because properties that were in A zones are now in V zones in some cases when they remap, so
And we're
that
gonna
becomes
have coastal A zones.
yeah.
We'll have to decide as a town whether we want to implement B zone standards in those coastal A zones, or which ones. So, yes. Not to brush it off as being just because it's complicated, but it's complicated. Carl? Or people sitting around beating their heads against the wall trying to figure out, if you do this, then it changes that, and is that really intended? And we've got some real life examples right now we're dealing with that I'm grateful for, sort of. But it helps us say, what if you do this, then this happens.
Anything else on 23?
That is a priority, that one. I've got that marked.
4?
See, 24 is the windborne debris. It's the big one.
The 130 to 160.
One line, 2 lines make a big difference.
$25. $26 and $27. This is a series of what's been crossed out of different types of titles.
And there are, no, I guess there are no additions. Yeah, so apparently we were, in theory, accepting more certificates than the county does. It's just making those consistent. And I think I mentioned it before, the first section there, 6.232, there's no reason to list those and have to update those. It's just whatever's consistent with the law. And again, maintaining Lee County construction licensing.
All right, page 28, same stuff. More contractors we've crossed out, or licenses, licensures.
John? On 29 at the top, I just noticed this, B, it talks about the County Construction Licensing Board ordinance, should we put, or as amended? References in 90. Old one, sub
29,
29B at the top. Basically references Lee County 9620 by adopted, it should be.
I think that you can go the policies, procedures, safeguards applicable to all, to the Lee County Construction Licensing Board hereby adopted according to Lee County ordinance.
So I would
Whatever.
request for approval of striking that to Lee County Ordinance 9620, just leave it as are hereby adopted.
Okay. Anything else on there? I mean, I'd asked a question about contractors.
And is it, kind of off of this, duplexes not do self-permits either? Has to be commercial. It's considered
It has to-
commercial,
Yeah.
even though it's just 2 units, which we don't consider commercial till they're 4 units.
And here, the reason why, and the theory behind it is, if you read the definition of owner builder in the statute, is that the owner can't occupy both sides of the duplex.
That was
But
the
if
one year
they
that I was
could-
talking about, is there's a
could do
reference.
Then it wouldn't be a duplex.
No, it could be owner, I mean, it can be owner-family.
No, but what is it?
But there'd have to be you can't have two separate buildings. They would have to pierce the wall.
No, but I'm saying in a duplex, 2 owners can be brother and sister.
They're not the same owners.
There's a whole provision there that your intent is to occupy it for a year.
And they are occupying it.
But
Can't occupy both.
Occupy
the
both
owner,
sides.
the owners, the occupants of the structure, not the owners of the structure. If it's my brother, I'm leasing, right? Or I'm loaning. So I'm not, I'm just, my brother's going through a rough patch, and I'm going to allow him to move into my duplex. Not me.
What if it's owned husband and wife? Husband lives on one side, wife lives in the other. Just saying.
Happy marriage.
That's a good
Just
one.
kidding.
But,
You know, there's always we can sit here and hash out exceptions, but we're gonna be here a while.
could be a new wave.
I'll run that by my wife.
I'm very happy.
Per units, right?
Yeah.
Not just
But,
closets
I mean,
anymore.
but even for a fence on a duplex, it has to be commercial. You have to it cannot be
Correct.
when it's on one side.
Well, I
Well,
mean,
you figure the intent of a duplex too is that you're gonna make money off of one side, hence making it a business venture, period. At some point, whether it is now.
I just
or-
didn't know that. I didn't know that.
And I did, and part of doing this, that's where I learned that 1 year provision is, intent basically is owner builder is to live there and occupy it. Do less than a year, then that's a violation of the provision.
That actually makes sense.
Sell
as
it, it's a
soon as you
violation of
called
the
me,
provision.
asked me about that.
But it is your intent. If
Right.
things change, cannot that be a circumstance?
I don't know what the result, what the penalty is, but it's a violation of the owner builder if you change it within the year.
I want to, I think it bears repeating here that when we come forward, particularly with owner builder in the context of this, it's not the town. It's the state telling us this is how it has to be.
Right.
So it's not that we're trying to make it more difficult or impossible. We're simply putting in our code that which the state tells us is how the owner builder statutory provision is administered by the state, and consistent with the Attorney General opinions that we've seen and the instructions from the Florida Building Commission.
I'm just saying that I always assumed that if you were an owner of a duplex and lived in one side, that you could do owner permits, because in our world of real estate, they're not commercial until they're 4. And so that's, I'm learning all this.
I'm not necessarily, point. I think that if you're occupying half of the duplex, then yeah, that's not a problem. Or if you haven't yet rented, the problem is that you run afoul of the section in the state statute that says it's presumed that it's not an owner builder if within a year's time you're not occupying the unit. So in the case of the duplex, the moment you do the work under owner builder and you turn around and you rent it, if you don't sit on that duplex for at least a year, it's presumed to have been done as outside the owner builder provision.
Do you have to sit in it for a year before, a year after, and a year
A
after?
year after. Is if on your side of the duplex, you can pull an owner builder.
Well, you could do that upon purchasing it. You don't have to live in it a year before you can pull an owner builder permit.
No, it's just,
Just a
the
year
law,
after.
the law says that it's presumed that it's not an owner builder situation if the presumptive owner sells or rents the unit where he or she, so,
You could live in one side for a year and do it, and then you're tenant in there after a year, and then move into the other side and renovate it. Live there for a year.
you'd have to have the unit sit vacant for a year.
Why?
Because it's the 1 year, you can't
No, I'm
occupy
saying
it for
if you-
365 days.
No, I'm saying you own it, you renovate it, you live in it a
You're talking
year.
about remodeling something, right?
Yeah, or doing whatever,
Not
and
building
then,
new.
then you can move into the next apartment and do it and live in it a year.
Theoretically,
Yeah.
yes.
I'm just
But
was
where would a
surprised
fence
by
fit
that.
into that if you're,
Yeah.
could it go?
I just
across
like
both
the economies
properties?
of scale don't work
No, it
there
can
if
go-
you're
it can go
looking
down just one lot side.
to make money,
I
but
just did it on a duplex, and I was surprised. Well, I mean, I just never thought I had.
More
that
importantly,
commercial.
not our regulation.
All
Right.
right, so we could sit here and talk all kinds of fun pieces on that one in particular.
I do like
Page 30?
Karen's idea, husband and wife.
Anything on page 30? All righty, so this is a public hearing, so I'm going to open it up for public, close that piece and open it up for public comment. No public comment, no one's here. So I'm opening it up for a resolution. Motion, sorry. Do I hear a motion?
Please incorporate the changes we discussed.
All right.
Generally or specific.
I will make a motion to approve the text amendments to Chapter 6 of the Land Development Code, amendments with changes discussed here in this meeting. What else do I need to add to this?
well, and you forward it to the council with recommendation of approval.
Forward it to council with recommendation of approval. Do I hear a second? Who wants it?
Scott?
Scott?
I second.
Member Safford seconds it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. And it's passed. 5-0. Okay, closing our public administrative agenda. We'll start with LPA member items. Scott, do you have anything?
No, I do not.
Jane, do you have anything? All right, I got just a couple of things. This is anything coming up on the January 19th meeting that we need to be in attendance for.
That will be, yes, the
Thing you kicked off of this
height and
past one?
setbacks,
Right again?
height and setbacks, and the special events. This will be this week, and it got moved to
I'll make a comment on that. That second reading, to the extent that, you know, obviously, any of your attendance of designated individuals is appreciated for second reading, but to the extent that the board member appeared at first reading and maybe provided comment, those are already part of the record.
So anything, and we don't know of anything on 2-1, the 2-1 meeting at this point.
No, we didn't have any first readings this,
Would be on it.
yes, I'm sorry, yeah, this probably could be on.
Does anyone like to attend that meeting for us? February 1st? 9 a.m.? I don't know that we necessarily need anybody with this in particular. And also on 121, there is a joint chair session that I cannot make. I notified the town clerk I cannot make it. Jane, are you available on January 21st to attend a meeting with town council?
I have a doctor's appointment, but I can see if I can move it.
Can we designate someone else as a member representative? Is anyone else available that could attend that? We will just be, and we'll have a discussion about what we're working on.
Normal council meeting.
No, it's after an MMP session. It's a Thursday. It's after an MMP. So what, 11 did it say?
Okay, yeah.
We'll be on a college visit. South Carolina.
Sounds fun.
MP's at 9, so probably 11, John, right?
I'm very proud of she's
If you have school online, why don't you just do it online?
actually, a lot of these schools are going back. We have one that's actually
fun.
in
Come on,
school in
Scott.
Boston.
God, I wish.
What?
Mine are still out. Their
Mine in
schools are
Boston
opening.
is there. Oh, yeah, and this school in particular is also in. Anyways, neither here nor there. Can someone else attend it? Wow, we're batting 1,000 here, people.
I mean, I can try to reschedule, but I've had this appointment for like 6 months to get it to.
Then
You know, obviously, if you can't, we'll
can't.
advise the council that
we worked on it.
tried to, and everyone
Can we
was
submit
otherwise.
something to them in writing as to what we're working on, what we would like to
Sure.
work on? Then I will put together something to submit in writing. I want to just take a minute to talk about what we'll submit to them. We think that we are looking to work on the next 12 months on comprehensive plan stuff
LDC.
and LDC,
Yeah.
as well as this flood piece here that we'd like to discuss probably more in depth, so that Peter Holt can give you the proper tools to move forward. 'Cause I hate for us to come up with ideas and then go to council and they say, nope, that's not what we want to do. So that would very much be something we need to talk to as a greater whole.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big conversation, partly because, you know, context and things that we talked about. It's not just adopting some regulations and trying to do your best. It's also, you know, we're a repetitive loss community. There's more standards and more views of us, and like our CRS rounds is every 3 years now instead of every 5 years. So because of that, so there's things that we're going to have to do in the future to help reduce that. And again, repetitive loss meaning claims of insurance claims, which goes you're putting in your storage and parking and access areas, those types of things.
How long ago was it that did that presentation about the point system and how many points we have and where we sit? 2 years ago?
It's been longer
Yeah,
than
so
that.
October we got the 5, so we should have the report that spells out which categories we have.
think
points in.
that was really
and then-
beneficial to me. I think if you guys could put something together again for the new members, that would,
My bigger question though on that one is that, because I've held off going to town council, ask for a joint session, because we really don't have a great agenda to sit down and talk with them about. I mean, we have some ideas that we want to change. This would be a specific topic that needs to be discussed before we start making changes.
I think you
As a
should
result.
they should present the overview first before
I
we,
think that might be a good one to present during that meeting.
that was really helpful.
And obviously it's changed because the points are different and a different score now, and
Right.
And again, I don't want to miss an opportunity to, Lee County has a huge part of that because they help with the communication, with the publishing of the hurricane book and all this other stuff, so that their outreach, that's a huge resource to have.
I'm not saying don't do it, I'm saying maybe that's a better if we would ask council for a joint session, that he does that at the beginning of it before we start our discussions.
I agree, because I think the more people that understand, you're gonna have more eyes on a town council meeting. Not a lot of people in the community understand the impact of the federal flood insurance program and the community rating and how all of that works. So the more opportunity that more people have to understand it, the better, I would think. Just be aware of it.
I agree, 'cause it sets up the discussion about regulations.
Okay.
When we adopt regulations, some of those are just general protections and required, or a version of what's required, and some of those are to gain an advantage for points.
Also,
Yeah,
my
oh, that's
official
true
letter
too.
to
I
them.
forgot about that.
One more thing, I have a question for Jason, and I know we made some amendment changes to this, and I just have not had a chance to look it up. Raised pools. Had to be, if I remember right, we had changes where they have to be within the original footprint of the house and abide by
Right, so
primary
locally,
structure setbacks.
locally, we made some changes to clarify supposed to be implemented, just to make sure future reviewers do it, is that when you elevate the pool, it becomes a principal structure setback. There's been some community conversation, I think, with builders about some of the issues, flood regulations related to separate. I didn't make sure elevated pool complies with a principal structure setback.
Not accessory structure.
Right, regardless of whether it is, right, so FEMA reasons, and I keep saying FEMA, or local flood regulations and other reasons, sometimes you have a structure that's not structurally attached, and sometimes that's a definite accessory, but in this case, it is the pool, whether it's physically attached or not.
Has to meet the principal structure setbacks. It can't be in front of.
Well, no, your accessory structure, like for a shed setback, is different than house.
So it's still 25 feet from a waterway or,
Right, 20 from, I think it's 20 from the rear, 10 on the sides versus
20. Oh, yeah, okay.
whereas your accessory structure may be 5 on the side and 5 or 10 in the rear.
Wondering, I mean, I had gotten a question, it says there's 2 pools going up right now or something like that.
Right, so some of the
Somebody asked me
confusion,
about those.
some of the confusion is accessory structure is something that's smaller than, incidental and subordinate to the house, but also detached. In this case, you can have a elevated detached pool, but it has to, in fact, still have to.
Points to attach it to the house, but I get it, yeah, okay. I just,
Well, no, for flood reasons, I mean, there's reasons for flood regulations why you don't physically actually connect it. Always trying to protect the house and, or insurable structures, that's.
All right.
We want to make sure people weren't trying to get around the setback issue, by complying with the flood issue. Can't do that, you can't comply with the flood, but then all of a sudden, 5 feet back for pool. Yes, we changed.
I thought we did, and I quoted something like that, but yeah, pretty close. Close enough. All right.
That's, you don't see a lot, you don't, interior lots on the island, you don't see elevated pools.
Lee County definitions of accessory structures, there's a height where an elevated pool would be on that height. There's a certain limit when you're on a water body. Right. I don't know if we've looked at that, but
Took the approach of basically, it was 36 inches, 3 feet or 4 feet, anything
There's 4
over
feet.
than that. Again, that's not including a shed, so if you had a 12 by 10 shed in the back from people or something, that accessory structure, but once you elevate the main structure itself, the structure's up. Most of the time, the only place you have room for that is when you own to. It has to do with what you're talking about, the line of sight and visibility issues.
because I know even like in Lee County, X amount of feet, there are protections for line of sight.
Yeah, the next step is probably clarifying is that the accessory structure should be limited to pipe, to your point of that, so pools and decks, and that's doesn't necessarily cover a. Most people don't have room for that, so by the time they put the pool in.
I don't have anything else, so we're just kind of putting around there.
No, I don't think so. We will, oh, yeah, sure, we will make one last push for members of the Historic Preservation Board, Advisory Board.
Have any,
And yes, there's 2 applications. One last push, and then hopefully maybe in February 1st meeting. I'll
those,
check
we
with
don't
the time.
seat those, town council seats those.
I'll check with the clerks, and I don't know if there's other committees trying to fill seats too, so they'd like to do them all at one time, but perhaps by February 1st.
Anything for next month's agenda?
So next month, you will have, yeah, there's probably 2 items that'll be flowers.
One long, public comment? Ooh, packed
Sorry, let
house
me clarify,
today.
they may not be from us, there's at least 2 potential applications for private development.
Okay.
Not necessarily a text amendment or anything.
Public comment? Not a soul in here. Closing public
Well,
comment.
wait a minute.
From the public, I mean, we've got Carl here from the town. All right, so do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Who seconded it?
Second.
All right, Karen seconded it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, we are out of here.